The 5-minute questions now, and the first question is from Arnold Viersen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go, my area of questioning will be on the 94 recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I was just wondering if you, what the plan was for rolling those out, and if you've prioritized the recommendations, and if you could provide us with perhaps a list of, in priority, essentially.
Mm-hmm. The minister has indicated that in order to address the 94 recommendations, we'd have to do so, given all of the mandate letters of the cabinet ministers, in full respect, recognition, and partnership with the indigenous communities and organizations. And so there are conversations taking place. Some of the calls to action included the inquiry on missing and murdered Aboriginal women. Some of it includes how do we engage on education. Others involve other aspects. So there is a pretty broad engagement on some of these actions that's already been taken. And there are various engagements across government that are out there through, just to name a few, Parks Canada and Public Safety. So it's sort of a long-term process. There's definitely a view that as we engage on the TRC, we're also going to have to use the lenses of Section 35 to look at that and to address it. So that's currently what's happening on multiple fronts.
Is there one area where we can see what the progress is being made on each of those individual recommendations? Like, is there one person that's dealing with them? Is there somebody accountable for it, essentially, I guess?
Well, there are various people accountable for different recommendations. So missing and murdered, or the women's inquiry would be accountable. Yeah. That would be status of women and ourselves. On the investments around education and looking at new approaches to education, that would be ourselves. There are other things that are addressing specifically in health, and Health Canada is addressing them. Yeah. In answer to your question as to how we need to communicate outwards, we are looking at how do we engage and how do we communicate in partnership with the Indigenous peoples moving forward on that front.
Thank you. Is there any cost analysis to particularly the entire recommendations? Has it been done? Do we know, like, has somebody drawn them all together and said, this is to implement all 94 recommendations, this is what has to be done, and this is what it's going to cost?
There's no rolled up cost analysis on the calls to action, because how we address the calls to action will follow the broader engagement process. So there's no place right now that you can go to. There's certainly a lot of actions that are being taken, and we're certainly conscious of the fact that we have to engage and get to addressing those recommendations, and we'd have to do so as others have said, in a nation-to-nation relationship, so in partnership with our colleagues.
How about some of the recommendations individually? Have we looked at the costs of them as individual?
Well, individually, some of the recommendations, as I said, I picked missing and murdered, but there are others as well around looking at parks, looking at sport, and people are again engaging on how we're moving to implement that. The government's very committed to working in partnership, and so it's hard to cost out something that would be a unilateral action moving forward.
We've seen some about, I've been in a lot of conversations. I have 14 First Nations in my riding. I've been in a lot of conversations with land claims, what is traditional territory, these kinds of things. Have you done any study on what third-party impacts of these land claims or traditional territory deals, how that's going to work out, and how private land ownership plays into that?
So, I mean, generally speaking, there's no direct impacts on private land ownership, in that land claims are settled through, kind of three main tools. The first being the provision of Crown land, either federal or provincial, if it's available. The second being the provision of cash in substitution for being able to provide land. And the third then is that the cash enables the given Indigenous nation to purchase land on a willing buyer, willing seller basis. So there's no direct impact in that we don't expropriate, or the government doesn't buy up land from third-party private individuals in order to then make it available.
when there's been a land claim deal that has been settled, is there taxation rights given with that land claim?
Just very briefly, we're out of time.
Sure. It's a complex answer.
We have time